All right, Sheepdog Nation. We are doing episode 13 today. As we said in the last couple of episodes, we're really trying to ramp our podcast, the Sheepdog Nation podcast, back up. We're now in 2026, so this will be our official podcast for the new year. And we are starting out with a special guest. And, you know, we do hope in introducing each of our guests, you appreciate that we're trying to make sure that the guests that we have really tie into who we are as an organization, that we talk about topics that you might be interested in. So we may go off the map a few times and chasing some interesting aspects of our guest. And I think you're going to see that today with Tracy Dufault. And welcome, Tracy, as I get ready to read your little bit of your bio here.
Thank you, Lance.
Tracy is currently the senior vice president with Walmart, and she's in charge of strategy initiatives and disaster relief efforts, which we're going to get into a little bit more. Obviously, as a disaster response organization, is one of our pillars. Her Walmart experience. She joined Walmart as a vice president of merchandising operations for packaged goods for the U.S. business in August of 2017 and was promoted to a senior VP merchandising operations for food in October of 2019 and recently moved to lead merchandising operations for the total Walmart U.S. business.
Well, that was my job before moving to strategic initiatives.
So now the strategic initiatives has really kind of replaced that. At Walmart, her team supports this used to be, right, from a merchandising organization business analysis. So you were responsible for forecasting, replenishment, pricing, space, and modular development and execution. And then we'll get a little bit more into what you're doing today, because this new position is relatively new for you, which is exciting in itself.
Yes.
Other work experience, and as we lean into that, Tracy is a sheepdog. We won't hold it against her that she was on the Army side, coming from the old Marine, right? But prior to
my father was a Marine.
That's right. Your father was a Marine, so she has got good blood. We know that. So, prior to assuming her current role, this goes back to you being a senior director with Damon Worldwide in San Antonio.
Yep.
That's interesting. Where you ran the HEB account for grocery, meat, and seafood, service deli, and general merchandise, as well as services. So HEB before Walmart.
And HEB before Walmart. Yeah, HEB before Damon. And so in Damon, basically, I was an account manager for the private label that HEB outsourced. Okay. And so I had those areas. And then before that, I worked for General Mills in a multitude of different roles. And then before that, I worked for HEB for 8 years.
So a couple different times with HEB as well. Yeah. Okay. And weren't they, did they come in first or second recently with the grocery store experience or something like that? So they've got a great reputation.
They do have a great reputation. They're a great organization, and we have a lot of respect for them at Walmart.
Yeah, so that gave me I always was curious from really what led you to Walmart, and that's neat to see that HEB experience and really kind of taking you there. And then from a personal information standpoint of a little bit more of her background to dig into some of that sheepdog mindset and experience. You are a graduate of West Point, and I believe you said 93?
That's right.
1993 graduate of West Point, and you majored in mechanical engineering, and you went on to become an aviator in the Army.
That's right.
How many years in the Army?
Almost 10 active duty, and then a couple more in the reserves during business school.
Outstanding. And you flew?
Kiowa Warriors.
And
I was a scout pilot.
Which is an exciting aircraft if you think about war movies. It's always kind of the sexy one.
And one of the first, because it opened up the year I graduated. So.
That's outstanding. Now, I want to get into this a little bit more. So let me finish, because it immediately takes me into a lot of questions about your service. One, obviously, as a female, and getting into, from an Army perspective, and then the pilot, kind of that frontline service takes a lot, right? And I can imagine the I don't want to say struggles, but I guess the struggles would be as a female really kind of getting into that space. So we'll dig into that a little bit more because I'm curious about your journey there. You also have an MBA from Harvard Business School, and you currently reside in Rogers, Arkansas, here in Northwest Arkansas. You have two amazing children, obviously, and 3 dogs.
I do.
3 dogs. They're probably not as amazing as your kids, but
Some days I am.
it's a close second, right? For the past 3 years, you've served as president of NWA Youth Hockey Association, which, of course, your son is big time into hockey.
Yep.
And
I
has
did
been
that before joining the sheepdog board.
before the board here as well, and have successfully grown the sport of hockey by almost 50%. And I know you've been very invested in your son's career and his sport in hockey. And yes, Tracy is on our board in full transparency. I think you're actually our first board. No, Joe Donaldson. So you're our second board member that we have done an interview with.
Okay.
We talked to him about the Kilimanjaro climb. And so I think today, the big thing I really want to dig into with you outside of us going down some of these rabbit holes with the disaster response side is I would think that our audience would be really curious about your military career, right, as a female. And you, and as a pilot, and even some of that West Point experience. I know a lot of barriers had kind of been, chipped away at before you got there, but even still, the early 90s, I can remember that time of following the news on VMI and the Citadel. They were really, that was when they were having to accept females.
Yep.
So that was a big story. I don't know how long before that West Point had females. Do you know?
West Point graduated its first class in 1980, and it's interesting because I was just reading the article about the woman who sued VMI, who was more than qualified to get in. She actually never attended, but because she decided to go on to another school by the time the lawsuit actually worked. But it did open the doors to other women to go into VMI, and that was 1997, I believe.
Yeah.
Like, she's filed the lawsuit in 94, and I think the first entrance was 97. And by then, I had already graduated from West Point and been in the Army for a few years.
For a while.
So it was very foreign to me for these places to still be fighting when it was clear, in my opinion, that the premier leadership academy, compared to a Citadel and VMI, because I'm not biased at all,
Right.
had already successly integrated
Had proven
women
it.
and had proven that it could be done and had been done for some time. The first West Point women's class was basically, was very handpicked, right? A lot of them had already had some college ahead of time. A lot of them were, very good athletes and stuff. And so the class, but some were just, this is what they wanted to do and be a part of. And there weren't that many of that class, but that class has gone on to do a lot of amazing things.
I bet.
And they charted a very tenuous path. I would say by 93 graduating class, that not all of the things had been chipped away at. There was still quite a lot of discrimination. And there was a lot of women on women discrimination back then. And I can even say in the early years, I was even guilty of it myself, because you struggled so hard for your equality that when other women were falling short of demonstrating that equality, it felt like it was bringing you all down.
So you were a little bit harder on those females that maybe you felt like weren't rising to the occasion.
Right. And the same way females were harder on us when we were there, when they felt we weren't rising to the occasion. And so I think the tone is very different now. I have quite a few friends whose daughters go to the academy, and they don't feel like that at all, and which is great, because that was the whole point of enduring all that and going into the military and chipping away at it over time to really start to see those things go down, where women now can lean down and give other women a helping hand and lift them up, as opposed to saying, if you don't meet the standard, there's nothing I can do to help you, because that's not true, right? But it was, I mean, it was survival, in those times, and survival of the fittest. And that doesn't mean you didn't help your roommates and your roommates didn't help you. And I had male classmates that helped me and vice versa, right? So you realize pretty quickly that you don't do anything as an individual once you join the military. You are part of a team. And if you try to do it on your own, you will fail. Right? You are stronger as being part of a team. Regardless of what that team size is, you will always be better off for it. And you learn that pretty quickly. I think when you enter the academy or you enter the military in any kind of way, that somebody is always going to be better at you than something. You're going to be better at somebody else than something, and you can trade those skills and lift the whole team up by doing that over time. And that's really what I think you learn. It's one of the reasons why I make sure all my kids play sports and play team sports, is because you learn those same kinds of things in team sports and I played team sports. So I think having those backgrounds really teaches you how to be a team player, because you can't be a leader until you know how to be a team player.
Absolutely. So, well, and I have to be very transparent in this. I've been looking forward to the conversation with you to learn to appreciate better the perspective of a female service and sacrifice. But when I say transparent, a challenge for me in the Marine Corps for 30 years was, and I think some people will be surprised and some not, that I had been in the Marine Corps 22 years before I served with a female.
I believe it.
So you think about that, especially from ground combat units, right? That was so common for so long. And, for good or for bad, I wasn't happy about it at first. That when we deployed in 2009, I was the first sergeant with an H&S company infantry battalion, and we were told we were taking lionesses to Iraq.
Yep.
And so we were getting 12 females that were assigned to the battalion, and they didn't know where to put them, so they put them in H&S company with me. And I thought, oh, Lord, why am I being punished, right? And I said that just because it was an unknown for me.
That's right. It's change. Change
Yes.
is hard, even if it's
absolutely.
good change.
Well, and you now have to figure out, how do I accommodate females, right?
That's right.
With all the male-female dynamic.
And what
issues, right?
accommodations are actually needed and what actually aren't.
Yes, and I had no clue, right?
And it's always better to ask.
To ask and to experience it. That's how you learn. Right. So but what I brag about from that experience is they went on to be what I think of as some of the best Marines I ever served with. But to your point, that was because they felt like they had to fight harder to prove themselves.
That's right. They had to be better to be equal.
Yes. But I also know that when we started sending them out to line units, we were Task Force MP at the time, and we had entry control points on the Syrian and Jordanian borders, and we had to have females out there to help us, pat down and secure females crossing the border. To a Marine male standpoint, they could not say enough good things about the females that they had serving with them. And again, as I said, you could see, and this is where I started to feel bad for them, because I could see how much harder they were having to work. And I recognized that was what was probably most unfair, is that they were put in a position where they had to work so much harder to prove themselves. But in doing so, they elevated each other and themselves as a Lioness team, and did the entire female cadre of the military such a good service in proving that, hey, we're capable. This might be the most controversial part that I'll share. To a woman, those female Marines also said, this is not, they came into it thinking, I want to be part of the infantry. They all left going, this is the hardest thing a female will ever have to try and do. And that they said they would not encourage others to do it because of the dynamics of what the infantry is like. And they all said, hey, it was a great learning experience. I'm glad I did it. But they did not necessarily think that it was something that all females should consider, that females should be very open-minded and going, hey, this is going to be very tough. And if you're not prepared for that, then don't try something that is going to be abnormally hard, right? But I left that with such a respect for them from the standpoint that they lifted their game in a way that I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Again, as from a man's perspective, that you don't have to fight. So and now and then I'd like you to share more on that, because the next layer for me is, as you know, my daughter just graduated Air Force boot camp, and I just went down and saw her at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio.
Yep.
And she's absolutely thriving. Could not be more proud of her. I'm sure that having a Marine Corps Sergeant Major as her father probably helped prepare her for that a little bit, right? She did get a little bit of hard knocks growing up. But what I was most amazed by and impressed with is how accepting men are now of females. It's like, hey, they're just one of us. And again, that generational thing for me, again, to that point is there used to be a very fine line of we didn't hang out with females. Females didn't hang out with us. And now they have different floors, but they're in common areas together. They're studying together. They're hanging out together as if they're just servicemen and women. Then they're warriors.
That's right.
And there is no, well, she's a female, he's a male, competition or discussion, I guess would be the point. And she would talk about her female and male fellow airmen as if there was absolutely no separation or distinction. And that is probably what impressed me the most, is being able to come back after, now it's been 8+ years since I retired, and to see that dynamic. So I share all of that to just, again, stress how curious I am still about just how we got there and how much hard work I know women like yourself had to put in to make sure those barriers that had been broken right before you came to West Point stayed broken, right?
Yep.
And that you proved that this was the right decision, which now, of course, history shows that it was.
Yeah, I would say a couple things. Frankly, all men shouldn't become infantrymen either.
No, absolutely not. It's not to your point, yes, it's not a male-female. It's are you capable physically, period, whether you're a man or a woman. But back then it was stress, well, it was because you're a woman.
That's right.
Which, to your point, there are a lot of men that cannot do what a lot of other men do, right?
And I think back then too, we were only looking at it from a physiological standpoint, right? And not necessarily a mental standpoint either. Because I would say, there are men that might be physically capable of it that aren't mentally capable of it either.
Yeah.
And
it is very much a dual, yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing about, women. We're all people, right? And we all have have our strengths and our weaknesses. And I think the great thing about women breaking barriers and going to Ranger School and being SF and stuff now is that it's a standard. It's not about whether you're a man or a woman. And to your point of why the new generation is more accepting than us was because when you think about you grew up in a military that partitioned women and men. Mm-hmm. So that automatically partitions your mindset.
It does. Absolutely does.
And they're growing up in a military that doesn't do that. Mm-hmm. And so they're not taught a mindset of separation. I will tell you, the people that had the hardest part with me joining my unit were the wives.
Oh, yeah.
They were not.
I can imagine that.
The servicemen, because they had interacted with female pilots before that had flown other aircraft, even though I was the first female pilot in my unit to fly the Scout. I mean, there were some that gave me a hard time, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, they treated me like any other lieutenant that came through the door. They were going to give me crap like any other lieutenant. Mm-hmm. They were going to make me go through the paces. They were going to make me prove myself like any other lieutenant. And the truth is I was a good pilot. And so they had a really hard time. And it's been proven multiple times that women are naturally better helicopter pilots because they don't muscle the helicopter.
Yeah.
Right? They have much more finesse. Now over time, all that stuff evens out, right? But in the beginning, like I remember flying with my stick buddy and being like, whoa, because he's and I'm
He's
just
manhandling it, right?
yeah, and my Vietnam era instructor pilot who only had one eye, but he's out there teaching us. He's like, you just go like this, and so I did exactly what he said, but everybody else is kind of. And then they find their hover button, and everything kind of evens out over time. But
Yeah.
but it is the generational gap is how we taught the generation. It's not that the men of today are necessarily more progressive. Their environment is more progressive, and so they just don't think of it in the same amount of terms. A lot of those barriers have already been broken, so what's commonplace to them wasn't commonplace to you. I mean, when I walked into that unit, I had people that had never been in a unit, never slept in a tent with a woman before, and I thought my IP's wife was going to die when she found out that because he's my IP, so he's going to be in the same tent as me. I thought she was going to have a heart attack, and she gave me a really, really hard time. She gave him a really hard time for no reason. And, and you're thinking to yourself, it probably didn't help I was single at the time, but you're thinking to yourself, I don't care if your husband was the last man on earth, he's all yours. No, thank you. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here to do a job and to serve my country. And that's the last thing I want to do in this unit, because that would completely undermine any credibility I bring to it. So back to the point of, having the responsibility to be above reproach in a lot of ways, where guys can do kind of whatever and you can't, because everything you do is being watched 24/7. And I mean, I remember calling my parents on certain days saying, I'd rather flip burgers at McDonald's than do this. It was so tough. My commander was not nice to me. He did not believe I could get him out of the aircraft if we went down. Now, I was like, if you lost 20 pounds, I could probably get you out of the aircraft because you're a little overweight. But then the funny thing is, he and I had birthdays 2 days apart. So we went into our flight physicals together, and they draw blood, and he passes out at the sight of blood. And I'm like, I don't want to be in a helicopter with you if we go down, because if you have a hangnail, you're not going to pull me out of the helicopter because you're going to pass out.
Right. If he sees your blood, he's not going to carry you either.
He passed out at his own blood. So my point is it's not a male-female thing, right? At the end of the day, I'd rather fly with me than fly with him if something, if the helicopter goes down, you're bleeding at all.
If you're trying to compare apples to apples, it's not. Well, and that, there's a lot to be said with that, because to your point, and the one thing you said there that was very clear is, if you are used to barriers, then you're used to barriers, right? The barriers are there. If you grew up with them, that's your norm, right? And that's where that old saying comes through of breaking down barriers is that you have to. You've got to change mindsets, right? And that's why, as I said, for me, having females assigned to me was so foreign. It was scary.
That's right.
Because you didn't know what you didn't know.
And you don't want to screw it up either.
Oh, then there's the big one, right? It's going to be me if something happens.
That's right.
Right? To one of these females. It was the pressure of that. But even then, the men stepped up and looked at those women as fellow Marines, but they also was like, if this was my mother, this was my sister, this was my daughter, how would I want them treated? And so they did elevate their game to make sure they did their best. I think the other thing that has really changed physically for females, and I think it's, obviously we are different. I mean, men and women are built differently. But one of the big things that I noticed, especially towards the end of my career, was that women were changing the physical barrier. Mm-hmm. And one of the sports that I noticed really was a good transition to really help females break that physical barrier was a sport like CrossFit. Mm-hmm. Women, I mean, I never saw a woman do a pull-up. I mean, I saw a lot of women try to do pull-ups,
Sure.
in those early years. But by the end of my career, I saw a lot of women doing pull-ups because they were training their bodies
That's right.
to meet those standards, right? And so to your point, it's that standard of if women can meet the same standard as a man, then she or he deserves every opportunity to pursue whatever it is they want to do. But I do firmly believe that there has to be standards, no matter who you are, right?
100%.
And I think holding each other accountable to that. One thing, I don't know if you know this, my father was a helicopter pilot,
Oh, really?
Cobras and Hueys, and he retired as one of the last OV-10 instructors in the Marine Corps. But what amazed me, a Vietnam-era father, who was the first one to tell me as he was leaving the Marine Corps and had started training females, that his best pilots were the females. And it was to your point. Because we also see this on the rifle range in the military. Men come in there just going, oh, I know how to shoot a gun, rough, rough, rough. Females come in going, I've never shot a gun, so I'm going to listen to this man or woman, whoever's instructing me. And they get out on the rifle range and shoot better than most of my men because they listened. They didn't have this attitude, I already know how to shoot.
Right.
And it was kind of the same thing to your point with the aircraft. Men get in there and try to be men and just strong arm it, whereas from a female perspective, you're listening to the men and or women who know how to fly that aircraft, and you listen and you do well in listening to that instruction. So I think that was his point as well, is these women are coming in and they're listening, unlike a lot of the men I'm teaching. So and to this day, anytime we talk about women in the military, the first thing out of his mouth is the best pilots I ever served with were women.
Well, I think too, as a woman, especially as we're very used to juggling a lot of things at the same time, and I think that's true, particularly when we grew up, about how many things you had to, keep going at once, that multitasking. And so, and a lot of piloting is multitasking, right? It's moving around, it's looking at your instruments, it's flying the helicopter, it's looking at your barriers, it's talking on the radio, and you have to be able to do it. And helicopters, unlike planes, like you're constantly moving your feet as well, especially back then when there wasn't, autopilots and stuff as they are today. I was reading an article about the UH-60 Lima being, an old aircraft that needs to be flown all the time. And I kind of started laughing because that's like, compared to the 58 Delta, like the Lima was like the Cadillac, and, we were still like in the dark ages, as far as constantly having to fly the helicopter. So, it's all about perspective of time and technology,
Right.
As things have gotten more sophisticated over time. But that multitasking, I think, is something that, today's generation does it all the time because they've got their phones and this and that and stuff like that. But I think back in the old days, like us, women just do that and help. And you can see it even from like when you become a parent and a mother and everything else, of just how much the load over time. But even that's starting to change, right? Like men are picking up more of the household load. Men have stopped babysitting their own children and actually, parenting them. Like everything has evolved to a more equal or more, I would say, balance.
Yeah.
There's more balance, and the balance is decided by the relationship that you have with your person, and less by society and the rules that you're supposed to fill. Yeah. Right? If you want to stay home as a husband or as a wife to take care of the kids, like, good for you. Like, that's great. I never really stayed home with my kids, but that's because I needed something for me. It had nothing to do with my kids. So, I always said I was a better mother because I worked, because it's what I needed to have.
You felt fulfilled.
Yeah, to have my individual fulfillment so that I could go home and I could focus on them. And other people can find their fulfillment through staying home. And my mom did, right? And that's great. And
that's the key, right?
Judge.
Is finding what fulfills
Finding
you, makes
your
you better
purpose.
Around it. Because that's a great point of whether it's a man or a woman who feels like they're, quote, stuck at home. You're home, but that doesn't mean you're fulfilled and happy.
That's right.
And that can be a negative in your relationship as a parent, because you're unhappy at home, right?
That's
But
right.
to your point, if you're able to go and do what fulfills you, you come home in a better mindset, which makes you a better
Yeah.
parent, spouse, whatever that might be.
Yeah, and there's a tipping point for all that, right? Because those things can also stress you out, and it's like any kind of a stress curve. You get over the part of the stress that makes you perform the best, and you get to the backside, right? And we see this a lot in the people that we try to serve. When you have chronic stress and acute stress on top of it for long periods of time, then your performance starts to go down over time, right? Until you crash and hit bottom. So,
Goes back to that balance.
goes back to that balance, and that's why partnerships and expectations and all those things are really important as you move through your life and having those conversations. I was listening to a podcast yesterday, but it was on Instagram, not a real podcast, and it was just it was Mel Robbins just interviewing somebody, and they said, why do you think divorce is so popular? And they basically said, because people get married on chemistry, and they don't have the tough conversations of, what do we both want out of life? What do we both like? All the things that you get to later on as you mature, but you don't kind of start out in that way of, what are the expectations for, are you going to work? Are you not going to work? Are you going to stay home? Are you not going to stay home? Like, how are we going to handle these things when they come up? People don't talk about those ahead of times a lot of times. And so as a result, they wind up that way. But I think, I think you can say that about any partnership, work, what you do for a living, and in dealing with people. You find that if people don't understand what their purpose is, what gives them fulfillment, they wander aimlessly through jobs, through life, through relationships, because they don't know how to fill their own bucket. And when you can't fill your own bucket, you're always relying on somebody else to do it. And that's not a great way to live. So
No, and that's a great point. And I hate that I'm about to do this plug, but to your point, and I think this has to relate to everything that we do in life, whether it's a relationship, our job, the careers that we're pursuing. I was in college, and this was back when we had 4 or 5 stations to watch, right? And
Yep.
Oprah Winfrey. That's why I say I hate to say that I'm about to plug an Oprah Winfrey
it's a good show.
book of the month. She had that book of the month thing,
Yeah.
right? I was in a relationship at the time, and I kept going, how do we have these talks about, because to your point, we were, puppy love, fresh,
Yeah.
it's just someone I want to attempt to spend a lot of my life with. And she had a book that she was recommending called The Hard Questions.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, it was, what religion are we going to raise our children in? What type of cars are we going to drive? What type of house are we going to live in, right? Who's going to stay home? Am I as a wife, or, how much money do we think is enough? It really was all the hard questions that beat you up after the romance starts to fade a little bit into the real world.
That's right.
And so if you're out there listening and you're wondering, the book is The Hard Questions, right? So I laugh at it because as a young man at that point, I think I was 22, it really opened up my eyes to the reality of, hey, you need to be willing to have those conversations.
Yep.
And so to your point, this isn't necessarily a, couples therapy session here, but at the same time, I think it reflects on everything in our lives. We've got to be willing to ask the hard, tough questions,
That's
right? About where we are in our life when it comes to our career, who we're seeing, or who, how we raise our children, etc. In changing gears for a moment, and on that note, I think this would be a great place to pause for just a second. This will give you time during the commercial break to look up, the hard questions. But certainly glad that you're here with us today, Tracy.
Thank you.
I loved hearing this, and it brings me back to one of the interviews we did with, Bull Donovan. He was the Black Hawk pilot killed in Black Hawk Down,
Mm-hmm.
and his spouse was here. just talking about the culture, and you kind of bring it up from a wife's perspective,
Yeah.
what that was like. And so there's a lot of good synergies in there of being able to connect some dots with things that she shared that from your perspective has really now made me go, oh, I understand that better now. So that's nice. That's an episode that y'all can go back and listen to if you haven't captured it. But we're going to take a break here to recognize our sponsor for this episode, and we will be right back. For this episode of Sheepdog Nation, we'd like to give a special shout out to our sponsor, Black Rifle Coffee. Black Rifle Coffee has been an important supporter of ours for several years now, and we can't say thank you enough for the amazing support they've given to the mission of Sheepdog Impact Assistance. All right, we are back. We're going to finish up this episode with Tracy Dufault, and I want to transition into a little bit of Walmart, but before we do that, I'd like for you to share your one of each, your favorite or most memorable moment experience at West Point, and then the same while you were in the Army as a pilot. So start with West Point. What is something that really comes to mind when you think about West Point from a positive perspective?
Probably my favorite moment was my plebe year. We had just finished most of our finals. We had one left, and basically most of the upperclassmen are gone. And while this has changed now, at the time, you could not have any music your first semester at the academy. So we had one more behind, but we had computers. So we learned to play Jingle Bells by pressing the buttons on the computer, and it made different, beep sounds. And so we created Jingle Bells. And I remember sitting in my room with my roommate, with my friend Gaylord Green, and another friend of his, and the four of us sat there and we sang Christmas carols by trying to figure them out by pressing the computers on the button. And I will never forget that memory, even though, like, there's so many other things that happened there that were, big events or big crossroads for me, where I did something I never thought I would be able to do, and all of these things. But the camaraderie and to your point of just feeling like you're a part of something and a part of a team, and male, female, black, white didn't matter, because my roommate and I were white, and G and his friend were not, and it was just, none of that mattered.
No,
Like
you're
we
right.
were brothers and sisters, at the academy. We were having a good time, and I'll just never forget it, because it just shows you that even in the bleakest of circumstances, you can still have the best of times.
Yeah.
When you're with the people that you've you've come together with, like, forged in their plebe year of just trying to survive, right?
So many times like that. Yeah, it's those little moments, unexpected little
Yes.
moments, right? Where you find some joy in, yeah, I mean, it does. I think for all of us, myself and those listening, there's probably, because I have several of those that started coming to mind as you shared it. So that's really neat, though. I'm gonna go home now and play on my computer,
See if you can
keyboard,
do
see
it.
what type of
This is
music I
back
can
when we
make.
had, like, the green screen and DOS. But I will share one other military moment, which was my senior year. You go out with when you're about to graduate, you go out with your TAC officer, and they give a coin to one of the seniors. And I really struggled at the academy in my first couple of years. I went at 17 years old. It was only
You
2
were
months
young.
after my 17th birthday, because I had skipped 8th grade. So I was and I'm an April baby, so I was young, and now I was really young. And it's not something I would recommend to anyone
No.
to ever do again. But I struggled quite a bit, and then I finally kind of caught my groove, and then it was like things took off and did really well. I had a TAC officer my first 2 years that made it his life to try to run me out, and he did not run me out. And then I had a TAC officer like you who had only ever served in the infantry, had never served with women. So literally taking care of cadets was the first women he had ever taken care of. He had a very, I'm Hispanic, he had a Hispanic wife, and she was a firecracker, and she would just lay into him anytime he said anything that was even borderline. And he became partly my mentor, and he would have a bunch of us over all the time, from the company and stuff, because she loved having cadets over. So, and feeding us big meals and stuff like that. She was great. And on that boat, but I had challenged him a few times about things he had said about women and females and this and that and stuff like that. And on the boat ride, he gave me his leadership coin because he said he learned more about how to be a leader from me than any other person he had ever served with, which that was quite the moment for me, because
That's powerful.
in a lot of ways it felt like I had arrived personally, and I had struggled on top of struggled. Plus, I wasn't a runner before I went into that school. And, if you're ever thinking about going to academy or going to boot
Got to
camp,
be able to run.
got to be able to run. So, I was an athlete, but I wasn't like a runner. And so,
Especially as an officer.
that's right.
We always talk about officers, you got to be able to run better than anybody else.
That's right. And so in the 4 years, I'd learned to do all of that, right? Like to your point, I had trained my body and gotten, the physical fitness I needed in order to max the APFD, to be up with my male peers and all those things. But, from a leadership perspective, there were times where, I had peers that say, you're really great, but I don't think you're going to make it. I don't think you're going to make it. And I proved them wrong. Right. And then I went off and I continued to make life hard on myself unknowingly. It was frankly very naive that I chose Scouts. I liked the mission. So I chose it. It didn't even occur to me that it hadn't been open before I chose it, and that we were one of the first classes able to even choose it. At the time, I was ranked number 1 in my flight class, and everybody, let's just say that the number 4 person was really happy I didn't choose Blackhawks, because they wouldn't have gotten it, because everybody wanted the Blackhawk at the time. Because it was, the Cadillac, so to speak. Yeah. And so they got an aircraft they didn't think they were going to get, because there were only so many slots, right? And going to Scouts. And then I got the advanced aircraft transition into the Kiowa Warriors. So first I flew Alpha Charlies and then I went to Air Assault School. And then I went to and then I went to the advanced aircraft, and then I finally wound up at Fort Drum in January of 1995. So, and went to the 10th Mountain Division there. I would say my favorite thing, as a pilot, was when I was at the 10th Mountain Division, that IP that gave me a really hard time, was like, okay, DES is coming in. That's the Directorate of Evaluation and Standardization. They go to all the different helicopter units, and they make sure you maintain your safety records, your maintenance records, and then they give check rides to all the pilots. And we went out for our check rides, and I went out with this CW5 Weingant, who had been, in the Army for 30 plus years, crusty old guy, kind of thing. And he kind of mumbles through the whole check ride or whatever. And I do all the things and come back, and he was like, and he looks at me, he goes, "That was a damn good check ride." And I was like, "Thank you." And so I come in, and then my IP comes in, and I was like, and he's like, "How'd you do?" And I was like, I said, "I passed." And he was like, "Oh." And I was like, "Did you?"
No.
No. Now his check ride was harder than mine, right? He's an instructor pilot. I'm not, but he didn't pass, and I did, right? And but then he took credit for me passing because he's my instructor pilot, right?
Of course.
And truth be told, he was, he and a lot of the other pilots I flew with, because you don't always fly with your instructor pilots, were, they were, to their credit, they taught me and I learned, right? And so, so all that to say, I'm supposed to go to the captain's career course, and they basically come down and they said, they call me into my battalion commander's office, and they offer me the job at DES prior to going to the captain's career course and commanding, which most of the captains that go there are post-command, not pre-command. But because Weigand thought I had such a good check ride, the colonel running it had come and talked to me and thought, this is the one that's going to break the barrier in DES. And so he selected me, and I got to become an instructor pilot in the OH-58 Delta and did that for a year. But to your point of still breaking barriers, you have to go teach at school. So now you're an instructor pilot. I passed the instructor pilot course, no problem. Go out and teach my first student. And on my third day, we do auto rotations to the ground in single engine helicopters, which at first is really scary, but then becomes very fun once you know how to handle the helicopter. But I go out with a student who locked up on the controls after I turned the engine off. And I wound up having to hit him halfway through the air to get him to let go of it because he's in the right seat, I'm in the left seat, so I have only half the power. So I have to provide twice the physical power in order to roll the throttle back on. So I hit him so he would let go of it because he wouldn't give me the controls back. And this only happens in 11 seconds, right? And I wind up landing the helicopter. I do declare a hard landing, but after inspection, there's nothing wrong with the helicopter. Well, it all came to, she was probably selected because she was a girl. And so therefore, she probably, this is a 1,000-hour helicopter guy. Like, the problem has to be her. Mm-hmm. So Wygant comes over and he's like, I got to give you another check ride. We got to get you, right? And you have to do all the things. You have to go piss and bleed, right? And whatever comes back. And I'm like, okay. So they're like, we're going to give you another student. I was like, okay. So come back. I start teaching this other student who can actually fly the helicopter, even though this kid's never flown a helicopter before. But to your point, he listens. And so he does just fine. We're out there just fine. And this is probably like a week later. They gave my student to supposedly not a more experienced instructor pilot, but a pilot that had a lot more hours than I did before I became an instructor pilot. And I hear somebody declare an emergency. And they had a Class C accident. They had spread the skids, and he had done the same thing to this instructor pilot. But probably because he wasn't as new and a little bit more confident, he didn't react right away. He kind of tried to give the guy some instruction, and when he didn't react, it was too late. Whereas I panicked immediately because I didn't have any experience, you know. So I think my inexperience actually helped me, whereas his experience probably actually hurt him because he was a great pilot. There was nothing wrong with this instructor pilot, but the problem was the student. Yeah. Right? At the end of the day.
Twice he did the same thing.
That's twice he'd done the same thing, panicked when the engine shut off. And he was a Huey pilot before this, so it's no different. We did the same things in Hueys that we did in this helicopter because they were both single-engine helicopters. So, the moral of the story is that I still had to fight those battles, even then. But after that, nobody gave me any crap ever again. But you would think, as an instructor pilot, now one of the highest houred aviators in the Army, when I went to Fort Campbell, I was not put in troop command because the squadron commander at the time did not want to be the first one to put a woman in charge of a cav unit. He later became Chief of Staff of the Army. So apparently he changed his views over time, because if he had kept that view, he probably wouldn't have been Chief of Staff of the Army. We won't say which Chief of Staff of the Army it was. But ironically, he was just a regular pilot. The next commander that came in was a 160th pilot and came in, and the first thing he did was say, "You're taking command the day after me." He goes, "Why are you not already in command?" I was like, "I've been asking myself that same question." So it's interesting, to your point of view, to your point is, he was a 160th guy. There were no women in the 160th, not even, ground support at that time, right? That was just starting to be integrated. Here we had a pilot that had flown with women all over the place, but he wasn't going to break a tradition. Whereas this 160th guy was like, there's no person on this earth I just respect more than my wife. Why would I treat you any differently?
That's a good point.
So that's a good plug. If anybody knows Colonel Sam Torrey, he was an amazing person to work for. And he does have an amazing wife. And he was one of my favorite people. But
well, I love that. To your point, that goes back to those barriers. And you were, without a doubt, at the forefront of that. And to that point, how many, because you were the first female in that squadron when you initially joined it. Is that correct?
Well,
Female pilot?
when I went to the 10th Mountain, I was the first female in that attack unit because we replaced Cobras.
Yeah.
The CAV was next door. They didn't put me in the CAV, ironically, and they already had the aircraft. So even then, they decided not to put me in the CAV unit. So there, like, I didn't notice it at the time. I didn't think about it at the time. I thought it was kind of strange, but you could see how they were still avoiding the integration. And I think they thought I would have an easier time in the attack unit than I would in the CAV unit, even though they flew the same aircraft in a light division at the time. I think, there was a little bit of fanfare, which I quickly said I did not want to be a part of. They wanted to do photo ops and stuff, and I refused a lot of that stuff early on. I did very minimal things because I didn't want to be known that way, because to me it wasn't setting me up for success. And fortunately, my attack commander at the time agreed. He didn't want to make it fair, and the timing was good in the fact that the unit was coming back from deployment, where we had almost, they were coming back from Haiti. And so, where it had been really tense and there had been scuffles, but from the air, like, there had been very minimal interaction, and they had gone out on the Eisenhower to fly off of that. And so there was quite a bit of chaos going on with people coming home. So I kind of slid a little bit under the radar and didn't have to do as much stuff because I wasn't there to prove a point. When I chose it, I didn't even realize what I was doing.
You were just there to do your job.
I was just there to do my job. And so, but there were other people that embraced it, and and they fared fine too. But I just really, I got shot down once at JRTC because the guys on the ground wouldn't answer me because they didn't realize women were pilots. They were English, and so I wound up in the PHA with them, and I gave them a piece of my mind because they literally, it was friendly fire that shot me down. And after that they were like, "Oh, last Dowling, come on over, play spades with us," And then one of my soldiers mouthed off to me in the PHA, and let's just say he never spoke that way to me again because they went and took care of it, I guess the way that the UK Army takes care of things.
The way the British handle it, huh?
Yeah, and so it was kind of funny. I went again to JRTC as a troop commander, and in that case, I won some award there, for play acting or whatever, and how I handled a mission. They give out like little awards of the battle or awards of the thing or whatever, and so I got one. But after that, my unit, my warrant officers, like, moved me to the back of the barracks, and they like basically set up a line and protected me, because what happened was people started showing up wanting to know who Condor 6 was. And they had heard my name on the radio, and then people started giving out my physical description, and apparently people wanted to see me in person. So it wasn't all glamorous because they basically had to create a barricade. And then I had one of my female classmates who had taken the maintenance company about 6 months after I took the first female troop command in the CAV. She took the second by becoming the maintenance troop commander. And she's like, "Everybody keeps asking me, am I Condor 6?" And I'm like, "Nope." She's back there, and you're not going to get to her because her warrant officers aren't letting anybody go back there. Oh. So like it had some interesting twists, because people got really curious because it still wasn't the norm.
Common, yeah.
I mean, at the time, there were 4% women in Army aviation, so 4 to 7%, something like that. And so, I mean, we just weren't prevalent to begin with, much less prevalent in the attack aircraft or the scouts.
Do you know what the percentage is today?
I believe it's in the teens to 20s. It just depends on what you fly. But yeah, it's much higher.
Closer to about 20%.
Yeah.
Well, I love hearing the stories and, your experiences, again, one from an Army pilot standpoint, but obviously the female dynamic as well, and just the uniqueness of being put in that position. And
Mm-hmm.
well, I say being put in that position, you put yourself in that position, which is good. It speaks
Mm-hmm.
a lot of yourself and saying, hey, I want a challenge. I want to see what I can accomplish from the standpoint of meeting those challenges. So, and taking you then into your civilian career, we talked a little bit in the beginning about how you had that journey through HEB, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
But I really want to get up to the Walmart piece, kind of where you're at today, and how do you think, the Army really prepared you for where you are today with your career with Walmart? Do you, it sounds like, I think it's obvious for all of us who you spend a good amount of time in the military that
Mm-hmm.
those experiences at multiple levels, prepared us for a lot of the challenges that we would face in the civilian sector. But I've always tried to tell people, a job is a job is a job, right? Whether you're in the military or you're, serving in whatever capacity, the human dynamic is always going to be there,
Always.
no matter what. I'm sure that you've broken some barriers as a female in Walmart,
Maybe.
and some of the things that you've accomplished. In the position you're in now, I don't know how many females have held,
Well, the
this.
positions never existed before,
So, well, there in itself is a barrier, right? Walmart and your leadership believed in you enough to go, hey, we're creating a new position. Who are we going to give it to, right? So, from your own perspective, what is something that the military taught you that has set you up, you think, for success in Walmart today?
couple of things. Preparedness, right? It's also one of the reasons why I really wanted to do this role. I think we are really good at understanding what can be processed in SOP, what can be done ahead of time, what decisions can you make ahead of time, so that when something happens, you're not making them in the moment. And you can dedicate your brain power to the nuance of the crisis that you're handling instead of thinking about how you have to handle the entire crisis. So preparedness, I think, is one. Two, I think just people, right? You become, especially, in the military, as an officer, I taught people how to balance their checkbooks. I had to explain to them just because they had checks in their checkbooks did not mean they had
I remember those
money
days.
in their checking account. I was especially, I think, interestingly, as a woman commander, I had a lot of my soldiers that would ask me for girl advice, or relationship advice. And my first sergeant was just be like, she's not your therapist. Get out. And I was like, it's all right, kind of thing. And I would sit and I would lie on the tarmac, with them. I wasn't married at the time. I didn't have kids and have any place to be other than be with them. And I would sit and lie there. I remember distinctly on my back in the sun, because otherwise in Fort Drum you're cold if you're not in the sun. And they'd be working on the helicopter, which is something I can't help them do. But I could sit there and talk to them and get to know them and talk to them about their experiences. I remember when 4 of them had to line up because they all caught a venereal disease from the same person. And, you're like, okay, this is like you learn the best and the worst of all the people that you lead. And, and frankly, they're all ethnicities. They're all different levels of education. I think the one blessing you definitely have in aviation is they're all smart, whether it's street smart, common sense smart, but they've passed the ASVAB, at a high level in order to even become an aircraft mechanic.
That's right.
And a gunner or whatever else. And so right off the bat you're dealing with people that have the potential to be more than that. And I had quite a few soldiers that wanted to become warrant officers and fly, or they wanted to become officers someday and stuff like that. And so you learn to invest in people as individuals, even though you have to invest in them in the same way as team members, as part of your team. And you learn to individualize leadership while also being equal about it. And I don't mean to say that equal is same and same is equal, right? And we learn that with kids, I think, later on, right? Your kids are not the same, so you're not going to handle every situation, the same situation with all of your children the same way because they respond differently. They're different human beings, right? And you learn that over time. But I think that's true in the civilian world of leading people, just as it is about the sons and daughters of America. And so the nice thing about being in aviation is the units aren't big, as a lieutenant and as a captain. So you can really get to know your soldiers and get involved in their lives and develop them and help them really go where they want to go over time. So I think preparedness and learning those nuances of leadership. And I think the other thing is probably the number one leadership thing I pass on to other people that I learned about leadership is not how I want to show up as a leader. Leadership is about what you need. And I need to show up in the way that serves your needs as a leader, not about you making me the leader I want to be. Does that make sense?
It does.
Because, again, back to people are individuals. They all have different goals and aspirations. They all respond differently to feedback. I remember somebody once telling me, God, you take feedback really great. And I thought to myself, are you kidding me? I went and threw things after I walked out of here last time. I don't take feedback great. I might handle it in this moment very calmly, but I think, your perception of people, you have to get past that initial perception, because I had to admit to that person, I'm actually, I didn't take it well. I really struggled with what you told me and stuff over time. And when you learn to be vulnerable yourself and you learn to, allow that vulnerability to care about the people that you lead, you learn to give leadership that they need as opposed to what you need. And it's really simple in the fact that sometimes people ask me, how do you like to best be communicated to? I was like, I don't know. How do you best to communicate? Because I guarantee you, it's my job to make your life better, not the other way around. My life will automatically become better if your life is better, right? I don't have to worry about me if I take care of you. That's kind of, I think, the point of view. And I don't know that a lot of civilian leaders learn that very quickly over time.
No, and I think, you bring up a good point, because that was something that for me, in the Marine Corps, it was about, getting your Marines to bend to your will. And it was, it was tough love from the standpoint, hey, you're here to do what I say. And I'm going to tell you what to do, and you're going to do it. And if you don't do it fast enough, you get punished for it, right?
Yeah.
And I hate that I was almost 20 years into my 30-year career before I heard the term servant leadership for the first time. And came from, Sergeant Major Brad Castle, who was at the time a, folk hero of ours, and he turned out to be a mentor of mine for a while. And he's the one that said it, that, you are here to serve your Marines, not the other way around. And boy, you talk about a sea change and, perception of what the Marine Corps had been teaching for so long. And to understand that, you're here to make them better, to your point, right?
Yeah.
And in making them better, you will be better yourself.
You will be. And, every time I've had struggles or something like that, even in my career, it's interesting the way those things have paid dividends to me that I didn't even realize I was doing at the time. Somebody will say, well, you've helped me numerous times. Of course I'm going to help you this one time. And I'm like, I have? And they're like, yeah. And they can name it off, and I barely remember it, because it's not because they're not memorable. It's because it's how I think in what I'm doing. So I don't even think about it when I'm doing it. I just do it, right? But I have had it come back to me in a way that has really filled my bucket in a lot of ways, of saying, you know what, the way I have poured into people and the way I have poured into relationships has really paid off in ways that I never would have expected. And from people, sometimes people I never expected. I remember being at Walmart one time, and I had given a speech to suppliers right after I got the Walmart U.S. merchandising job, and a gentleman that worked for a local broker came up to me and said something. I just said something like, "I just want to thank you for changing my life," and I was like, "What are you talking about?" And I recognized him off the bat. He and I had worked together at HEB. He was the BDA for one of my friends. You know, he worked at Office Owner. He goes, "You were the only one who sat me down and told me it has nothing to do with whether you can do this job or not. If you don't have a college education, that is going to continue to be your barrier, and you're going to always be weeded out because you don't have it. It doesn't say you have to have one, but that is the expectation of what they want. So whether it's there or not there, you need to go back to school and finish your education." And so he did. And then he's like, "You know what? I never had a problem getting an interview for a job ever again." And he had moved on from HEB, and he had gotten the job in HEB later on when he had finished it off and stuff like that. But it's just, the point is that, like, I just told him the truth. Like, it's going to hold you back here or anywhere else because the world is shifting, and the world is starting to require degrees in this area. And this was 20 years ago. Now we're shifting back the other way, where we don't actually put as much value in degrees as we are, because, you know, the world, it's just the skills based is very important, as opposed to just saying, well, you took a class and therefore you have a skill. That's not necessarily true, right? And so I think we're much more educated about skills based training now, and experience, and what that offers outside the classroom is just as valuable as in the classroom. But back then it was more leaning towards degrees.
It was critical, yeah.
And so, and I couldn't even tell you when I had that conversation. I mean, no idea. But so, like, those things come back to you in like ways you just never expect. So I just always believe that taking the time with people, you will never be sorry. It's kind of like going to the gym. You may dread it. You may dread having the hard conversation with somebody. You may dread stuff like that. But when you get done with it, like, you're never sorry you did it. You know?
Well, if there was, a kind of closing, I'd love to hear from your perspective, 2 pieces of advice. And let's stay with that female theme of, if you were going to recommend one thing to a female that you were speaking to about, they were considering serving in the military, what is one thing? And I do recognize that generationally, to the point of what we've discussed, is some of the barriers that females might face today are not going to be the same when you and I, were serving. But if you could think of, from a military standpoint, if there is that one thing that maybe can cross generationally, what would that be?
Well, the one thing that hasn't changed is that you cannot fly a helicopter if you're pregnant, because it is not good for the baby. So unlike a fixed-wing aircraft where you can fly until you can't literally pull the yoke back because your stomach gets in the way, the vibrations of a helicopter are detrimental to a fetus. So it puts you out of the cockpit for almost your entire pregnancy, and then any post-maternity leave that you would take, and then you have to come back up, and you have to train, and you have to get back up. And so the thing I would always say is, if you want to start a family right out of, right in the service and stuff like that, you probably shouldn't choose aviation as a branch, because you're never going to be able to do those jobs early that are going to give you the experience, the hours, and the time. Because the truth is once you after command, there's not a lot of flying left for officers after that in the Army. Now that's different in the Air Force and the Navy and stuff like that. But as an Army aviator, like, your prime flying is the first 10 years of your career. And then you kind of become a staff officer and you do other things. And then you come back to it as a battalion commander. So if you love being a pilot and you love being a helicopter pilot, then if you have your family early, you're going to take that away from yourself, just because that's just it.
So wait a little bit later. If you want to be a pilot in the Army, then wait a little bit later on the family perspective.
That's right.
But if you want to do family now, your recommendation would be, don't really pursue the aviation side, because having a family is going to reduce that opportunity maximize, to that point. That was one thing my dad, for good or for bad, pilots live on, on the airstrip waiting for an opportunity to fly.
That's right.
And so if you limit your ability to fly, i.e. by starting a family, that's obviously going to hurt your career in the
That's
long
right.
run.
And, and then if you do go to, get deployed, like you can't go with your unit,
Yeah.
right? And so those are things like you have to consider. For me, it wasn't really an issue. I wasn't married. I wasn't planning on getting married anytime soon. And I didn't get married until after I was kind of, I didn't get married until after I got off active duty. Like, I mean, it was to someone I was going to have a child with. And then I had to kind of rush, like, hey, you got to do that. And then a war broke out and didn't let me do any rushing. So, it was just all these factors. And so, family planning and management, is a real thing if you are going to have your babies yourself,
Yeah. Think about that.
and you have to set that expectation with your spouse as well.
Well, it goes back to those hard questions, right?
That's right.
You got to have those conversations beforehand. And you don't put yourself in a position where, life now is getting in the way of life.
Yeah, because I mean, my boyfriend, my senior year, and then after I left, he kept wondering why I didn't want to get married, and I was like, because I'm not ready. Your expectation is you're going to get married and have kids, and that's
not
not
where
me.
you're at.
That's
Yeah.
not where I'm at.
And imagine if you'd gotten married and then figured that out, right?
That's right.
Well, final thing then is kind of from that civilian standpoint, especially with your time with Walmart. What is something that you've learned through your time with Walmart that might impact a man or a woman in kind of that career path, or something that you've taken away from that is just a very valuable lesson learned from the business side?
I think one of the things is you're never going to feel ready for the next big challenge. I think it's interesting because in the military, I always felt ready. I think because you go to a school ahead of time and then you get a command, or you go to a school and then you fly a helicopter, and like the military is very good at preparation. The civilian world is not quite as thorough on the preparation and that career progression. And so, and there's a lot of different ways people get to the spots that they're in. So in the military, it's very guided. In the civilian world, it can be a lot more nebulous. And so I think, one of the things that I had to learn how to help people at Walmart or HEB or anywhere was they really have to figure out where they want to go, but how they get there may not be the same way the person before them got there. And so they should really learn to round out what their own, I wouldn't say weaknesses are, but their own lack of experiences or their own opportunities, and worry less about doing the exact same thing as the person before them, because they need to focus on what rounds them out to make them the person that needs to be to get that job. And that's scary for a lot of people. And I think it's scary for service members when they get out of the military and they go into the civilian world, because they're so used to having a defined career path. And career paths are not as defined in the civilian world, which is a wonderful thing at the same time. But you have to be willing to embrace the ambiguity of it and figure out what is it that's going to make me the best candidate for that. You bring a different set of experiences to the table than I do. And so our path to the same place will be different and should be different. But that's really hard to get people to. And I think, even Walmart, works on that as well, because, I think back in the day, retail was much more defined. And now retail is probably one of the most exciting sectors you can be in, because I mean, where else do you get to talk to? In my new role, I talk to people that fly drones, and I talk to people that buy gas cans and everything in between. People who run stores, who run DCs, who fix electricity at the store, plumbers. it runs the gamut of every pretty much job you can think of to running into the CEO in the hallway, right? Like it's such a big organization with so many opportunities that it can be, when you have a lot of choices, those choices can be overwhelming when you have a lot of choices. So how do you figure out what your purpose is, where you want to go? How do you narrow your choices so your choices don't feel as overwhelming? We learned that in the military because when I was given a mission, I didn't have to figure out how to fly the helicopter or what tactics I was going to use. I just had to pick the tactic I was going to use for that particular mission, right? And so I could spend all my brain power on the 3 choices I had to make in order to accomplish the mission, and not everything that I could have done in the military before I decided this was what needed to be done. And so you have to do that for yourself in the civilian world a lot. And you have to do that for yourself as a veteran when you get out, to narrow down your choices of what is actually going to be fulfilling and purposeful, because a lot of people just take jobs because they're used to having a job and they're worried about not having a job, because we have a relative amount of job security when we're in the military that you don't find on the outside. And if you don't spend the time figuring out what your purpose is, you're going to struggle in whatever job you take first out. And that's why turnover for veterans is so high in their first 2 jobs, because it takes them a while to figure out what their purpose is and what still can fill that bucket in the civilian world that doesn't fill it in the real world. But it's true for non-veterans as well.
Well, and you mentioned that, and that's a whole another topic we could go down. It has been very challenging to watch, even within this organization, veterans, coming right out of the military, the amount of struggle that there is, and that's one of the things that we try to help with through all of our other programs. But when you're the employer of someone right out of the military, having to watch that struggle is tough. With that said, that might be a topic for another day, and I also would love to come back and dig deeper into that disaster response side. But I thought, you know what, let's give you some time in that field as well to kind of fill that out and have a chance to manage things in this new position as you've experienced. Is Nashville your first disaster cutting your teeth in this position with the ice storm that we've had?
Yeah, so we went to Oxford, Mississippi, and then Nashville, where we had set up some parking lot activations for the community. In Oxford, the store itself was still on generator power. They weren't on the grid when we went there Sunday. Fortunately, they got back on the grid on Monday. But to your point, between rural and city, Oxford is, a fairly well-off town. Ole Miss is there, but the county is very rural. So the county still was 80% without power. And, that's where most of our associates don't live in the city of Oxford.
They're out in the county.
You're talking about, stores, serving the community on, 5% of the associates, 10% of the associates that are normally in a store, because the associates can't get there, So we were providing hot meals and showers and bathrooms and laundry service to the community, and of course our own associates, and in order to just make an impact and make people's lives a little bit easier. We had a big donation with another organization out there where we were filling grocery carts for families, and there's lots of different activations around. And in Nashville, it's more urban, so they had this was on the southeast side of Nashville, but they had but it was a very socioeconomic differing neighborhood, and it was the first time we didn't have a lot of truck drivers to spare, so our truck drivers manned one of our mobile kitchens. And so we sent out the truck drivers, and Tyson went with us, and they had a bunch of volunteers come in from their plant. But it was the first time we used a local community to round out the rest of the volunteers. And so we used the Tennessee Kurdish Council, and they organized volunteers, which is great because it's a big Kurdish community. It's also a big Egyptian community. It's also a Hispanic community. And so using those local people, we were able to make sure we had the right food, because of course we can't have any pork product in the food for the Kurdish side of things. And so we were able to serve that community, and we showed up, and there's the line is long for cars coming through. I think yesterday was our last day there because everybody's back on power now, and but we just try to show up where people need us the most, and that's not always a numbers thing. Sometimes it's just the fact that the community really can't necessarily support themselves because they're still trying to get their power back on and all those other things.
Yeah.
There were so many trees down. I mean, it looked like what it looked like here 2 weeks after the tornado, but this was like literally 2 or 3 days after the storm.
Yeah.
That's how many trees were down.
Yeah,
So,
it's amazing what ice can do when it comes to weight on limbs and trees
Yep.
and the damage it will do. Well, I've certainly enjoyed today, and I do. We want to have you back again and dig into a little bit more. I'd really like to. We spent a lot of time on the military side, which I appreciate, because I think from your perspective to our audience, that's a critical side of what we need to be able to hear and share. And it is. It's you've had a really unique career path, and it's impressive and hopefully inspiring to both men and women out there that are looking for some guidance and direction in their own lives. If anything, the book, Hard Questions,
Yeah.
right? So I still laugh about that because it's those little things that we run into that we don't expect that have such an impact on the things that we do. And I noticed that a lot in your own life and career path. And I will take away, like I said, I've got to go home and play on the keyboard now to see what type of music we can create. Well, hey, Sheepdog Nation, thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. Again, episode 13. I certainly think it was a good one, and we're very thankful to Tracy and the time that she spent with us. And we'll look forward to seeing you again in episode 14. We haven't determined who that guest will be just yet, but we've got a few people on the list that we're excited, whether it's episode 14, 15, or 16. All of them will be with us at some point. And so from me to you, we wish you the very best out there. Godspeed and God bless all of you. Thanks again for following Sheepdog Nation. We're out.